Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this week's session of the Cup of Cheer Advent Quilt Embroider-along. This week, we are going to be working on building the houses. There are 3 houses inside of this quilt. Each of the houses has multiple hoopings. We're either making the pockets for the doors, some of the houses have pockets for windows, and some of the houses have both doors and window pockets. So we have quite a few hoopings this week, and then we're also going to put the houses together. The blue house is one hooping for the actual house. The tan and the red house, we do the roof, and then we do the house body, and then we will put them together. So we're going to get started with the blue house, but again, I did do a checklist for you just to help keep you straight. The link is in the comment section, or you can find it in the video description. So we're going to be starting with the blue house. We have the embroidery part A, which is making the dimensional door, can be done in a 4x4 medium hoop. Part B, which is the actual assembly of the house, is going to be done in a midi hoop or a design that gives you 6x10 embroidery field. And if you're not doing the quilting, you can do him in a 5x7 hoop. The first hooping inside the medium hoop, we're going to want to place a wash-away stabilizer. And in the second hooping, we're going to be using our light mesh cutaway or the poly mesh. In the second hooping, the embroidery design is centered over top of the quilting design. And prior to getting everything started, we're going to apply fusible woven not only to the background of the block, but to the wrong side of all the house pieces. So there is the roof, the house body itself, and then there is a piece for the windows. You're not going to be putting any fusible woven on the dark blue pieces that are related to the door. You will need a bobbin to match the cover stitching that you plan to do on the door. And then when everything is said and done, we will be trimming this block to 4.5 by 8.5. Now I want to give you a little something that I'm going to do different. Is I'm actually going to go ahead and do not only the blue house door, but also the red house door. If we take a look here, in your designs, you have the blue house door, which is this one, and then we have the red door. Both of them are made in the same way. Nothing differs, and they will both fit inside the medium hoop at the same time. So I'm just going to go ahead and stitch all of my doors while I'm at it. And then when it gets down to doing the windows, we'll do both of the windows together as well. So I'm going to open up my blue door. I'm going to bring him in. I'm going to open up the eye, because in order to get both of these doors in here, I need to rotate them. So I'm going to choose my rotate function. I'm going to rotate him 90 degrees. And then I'm going to close my eye, and I'm going to move him towards the top half of the hoop. I want the section of the door that is cover stitched towards the center of the hoop. Okay. Once I have him in place, I'm going to hit my plus sign. I'm going to open my red door. I'm going to rotate him. I'm going to hit my plus 90 3 times so that, again, my satin stitching is towards the center of the hoop, and I'm going to move him down towards the bottom so that we have quite a distance between those 2 doors. And our excess, or what will be excess fabric, is away from the center of the hooping. Both of the techniques are the same for what we're doing. So if you are comfortable with combining designs, go ahead and combine your designs. And it's just one less hooping and maximizing the use of stabilizer. Okay. With the block for the blue house, okay, we have all the pieces associated with the door. Okay, that's the blue fabrics. You have 3 shorter ones, and then you have 1 long one. The blue fabric, the longest one we have, I think it's 3 by 8. Okay, we're going to take and we're going to set that to the side. This hooping is only going to use the 3 smaller ones. Okay. You're also going to need this piece of shape form. This is that really, really stiff, fibrous interfacing. And you want to make sure this measures the exact size that they specify in the pattern. So for the blue house, this needs to measure exactly 1 1/4 by 2 3/4. Okay, so make sure that you use your ruler, double check, make sure that everything, yep, 1 1/4 by 2 3/4, and then the red house has a different measurement, which we'll talk about once we get the blue door done. Okay. I have neutral color thread in the bobbin to start with. Not necessary at the moment to have anything special. So once your machine is threaded, we're going to stitch the door structure placement line. Now you will see that he has stitched 2 lines. Zoom in here. Okay, there's an inner and an outer line. We're going to place this piece of stabilizer, this shape form, inside of here. We want the door structure to cover the inner line, but not stick out from the outer line. Okay, so we want to make sure that it covers the inner line, but it does not exceed outside of that outer line. I'm going to tape him in place. We're going to return him to the machine, and we are going to stitch the tack down. Now, once our door is stitched in, our interfacing of the door is stitched in place, I'm just going to go ahead and remove the tape, and I'm going to return the hoop to the machine, and we're going to run the next color stop directly into the stabilizer. That's going to tell us where to put our fabric. Okay, I'm going to take one of my door fabrics. I'm going to place it right side up, completely covering all of that placement line. We are now going to tack this in place, but we are not going to do any trimming. We're now going to stitch the decoration of the door. We have 3 color stops. We have an inner door frame, we have a doorknob, and then we have the decoration of the door. It is completely your choice as to what colors you choose to use for the door. Once your door detail is all stitched, you have your doorknob and your decoration, you're going to take your hoop off the machine. We're going to turn it over to the wrong side. I'm going to take a piece of door fabric. I'm going to cover up exactly where I put the other one. Okay. And we're going to tape it in place. Okay, so I'm on the front side, the back side. We're going to cover all that up. We are going to return the hoop to the machine, and we're going to stitch the tack down and the hinge lines so that we know where to trim. Now, once that is stitched, you'll notice that it's stitched around. This little guy is now held in place. I would trim up any of the threads. We can go ahead and take that tape off the back. On the front of your design, there are two little lines that's stitched here. This is your hinge. We are going to trim all the fabric away from around the outside. We're not cutting away anything from inside of that hinge area. Once you have the top trimmed, we're going to turn over to the back and we're going to do the same thing. We're not going to trim in the area between the hinge. Now, once you're all trimmed, you're going to go ahead and take and change the bobbin thread of your machine to match whatever color you plan to do the satin stitching around the edge of your door. If you remember last week, I talked about changing the height adjustment of your presser foot. If you find that you need to increase the height of your presser foot to accommodate for the thickness of that shape form, you would come into the gears, come into embroidery. This is the thickness function in embroidery, and I would change to 7.5 if you are at 4. You should not need to go to 10. And if you don't have this function on your machine to be able to change, you will probably be just fine for that purpose. Okay. So I have everything changed, and we're going to run the satin stitch. Now, once your satin stitching is complete, if you're only doing the blue door, you can go ahead and remove that from the hoop, trim the excess stabilizer about 1/8 of an inch from the edge of the design, and you can remove the whatever is showing here with your paintbrush and some water, and then just let it sit there and dry. I'm going to now switch over to the red house door. Okay, so for me, the red house door information on creating that door is on page 57. We are doing the same exact steps. We're going to use 2 pieces of the tan 2x3. Your shape form interfacing needs to measure exactly 7/8 by 1 7/8. And we're going to repeat the same steps that we just did. Okay, so I'm going to return to the machine. I am going to stitch my placement line for my interfacing. Both of my doors are now finished in this hooping, so I can take it out of the hoop. I'm going to trim as close to the stitching line or the fabric that I can without cutting the fabric or the threads. Okay. So you can see I just have a little bit left. Around the edges. I'm going to do my red door later. I have my little container of water, my paintbrush, and I'm just going to kind of tap around. And get that excess white stabilizer to go away. Could very lightly, if you want to dip just the edge of this into water. I'm just trying not to put so much water on it that the door gets wet. I'm only going to worry about the satin stitched edge. I'm not going to worry about the stabilizer that's inside of here. Okay. So that door is finished. He's all trimmed, nice and pretty. I'm going to take this door, set it to the side, and we're going to set up for the next half of the blue house, which is putting the house together. So we are going to open up the quilting design for this particular file. It is the 4x8 horizontal lines, which I have here. I'm going to then open and add the blue house. So the blue house is the only one that you see as a complete house in the hooping. It also has the number 16 in the corner, and we're going to add him in. Everything stays centered, so as long as you didn't move the quilting design, when you add the house design, it will stay. Now we're going to work through embroidering the quilting, and we're also going to work through appliquing and the house fabrics and all of the other decorative embellishments. Now we're going to just keep moving, because everything at the beginning of this block is the same as it would be, and then I will come back here when we get to the section of adding the door. All right, so let's head on over to the machine. I have my midi hoop here with my stabilizer in it. Once your quilting is complete, we're going to work through the next 6 color stops, appliquing down all of the house pieces. So we have the light aqua, the dark turquoise, and then the white. We're only going to be placement line, tack down, and trim. There is no satin stitching or cover stitching that will happen yet. We're going to get all the fabrics in place, trim them, and then we'll go back and do all of our cover stitching. So we're going to run a placement line, we're going to place the fabric down, tack it in place, and then trim it, and then repeat the process for the other two fabrics. All of your house fabrics have been appliqued. We're going to now work through the next 7 color stops, stitching all of the satin stitch, decorative embellishments, windowsills, things along that lines for our house. So we're just going to work through on page 48 in your book what would be steps 7 through 13 to our house. Now, once all of your fabrics are appliqued down and your decorative touches are there, we're now going to applique the glitter snow to our rooftop. So while the machine is running you a placement line, if you've not already done so, peel off the plastic protective piece from the glitter. Once we have our placement line, we're going to place our glitter piece right side up over top of that line, making sure to cover it all, and then we're going to tack it in place. Once we are tacked in place, we're going to trim around the edge and once your glitter is trimmed, you're going to head to the ironing board. We're going to place a pressing cloth over top of that glitter, and then we're going to set the glitter in place by placing an iron over top of it for 10 to 15 seconds. And you want to protect all of your embroidery from that iron, so you want to cover up everything. No steam is needed. Okay. Once our glitter is glued in place, we're going to return that back to the machine and we will run the decorative stitch around the edge of that glitter. Step is to run the advent number in the corner of the house. Once our advent number is stitched, it's time to start working through the attachment of the door. We're going to stitch the door placement line, and then we're going to place the piece of door that we have is single layer, I believe it's 3x4, over top of that placement line. We will then tack it down. And when we tack it down, it will also stitch us some placement lines for a pocket. Now, they are the tiniest little tick marks that are in this hooping. It's very hard to see, I think, just barely. You can kind of, if you watch it while it stitches, you'll know exactly where to find it. We have that piece of fabric that was 3x8 that we folded in half. We're going to place the pocket, we're going to place the fold right at that tick mark. Okay. And then we're going to tape across that fold. We want to make sure that our presser foot does not get caught in that open fold when it stitches this in place. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to tack this door in place. We're going to remove the hoop from the machine and we're going to trim all of the excess fabric up to the edge of that stitching line. Now, once you are all trimmed, we have a little pocket right here. We're going to return the hoop to the machine and we're going to stitch the decorative stitch that's going to cover up that raw edge. Now, once you are decorative stitched, it's now time to align the door. We have our door from the first hooping. And we're going to align him vertically, top to bottom. You're going to center him. You're going to tape the right side of the door, okay, top to bottom. So we're going to tape him down here. She tells you to place 2 thin straight pins at the intersection of the hinge marks and the vertical stitch line on the door. Push the pins straight down through all the layers to the back. So you are right at that intersection of where those 2 lines are. She says push them straight down through all the layers to the back. Turn the hoop on to the back. Check that the pins go exactly through the stitch line on the back of the stabilizer. Okay, okay, so this top one is good. He comes through, but this bottom one is a little to the inside. So I'm gonna pull him out and move him. You're going to return the hoop to the machine, okay? Oh, sorry, not to the machine yet. We gotta take pins out, okay? She says to turn the hoop to the front, stick the pins into a wool mat, lift the excess door fabric between the hinges, and verify that he goes through. So you just want to kind of verify that he does go through the door, okay, down underneath. So you can just kind of lift that up and check. You can do that stuck into the wool mat. And so if I come over to the iron board where my wool mat is at, I can really stick that down into my wool mat and then slide this up, basically the pin, and verify that everything matches where I want it to match. Okay? So once you have everything verified, she tells you it's time to make sure that your door is aligned just right. You're going to unthread the needle of the machine. You're going to move the stitching on the machine forward 7 stitches and drop the needle and check that the needle aligns to the stitch line on the door. Okay, so I'm actually going to put another piece of tape on here for a second, just so that when I take my pins out, nothing moves. So I'm going to carefully pull those out, and we're going to come over to the machine. Okay, the color stop that we're doing is just this straight line. So we want to advance a few stitches, so we're going to hit this, what I call the S with the X in the middle of it. And then you're going to turn your stitch width knob clockwise, and you will see in this corner that it will move or count for you. And we want to go ahead 7 stitches. And the reason we want to move forward 7 stitches is because we've got to get past the locking stitches of the color stop. So while we're at the machine, I'm going to open that up. I'm going to turn my knob so that it will move forward 7 stitches, and I'm going to lower my needle, and I'm actually a little to the outside of that straight line that's right here. So I'm going to lift this, okay? Okay, and then I'm going to repeat. I'm going to go a few more stitches and make sure that I stay on that line. So I'm happy with all of that. We're actually going to go back to the beginning of this color stop, okay? So the easiest way to verify that we are back at the beginning of this color stop is we're just going to hit the needle and the thread. We're going to go down to 26 or up to 27 or 28, doesn't matter, but we're going to go away and come back, and that's going to put us back at the beginning of the stitch. I'm also going to move my machine down to the slowest point, okay? If you unthreaded your needle, you will want to rethread your needle at this time, and we're going to run this color stop. And I'm going to do it slowly so that if I need to make adjustments, I can as it moves its way down the machine. Okay, so I can pull this over or push it that way while it's stitching. When all is that, goodness, Amy, where's your proper English? When all of that is stitched, we can take the hoop off the machine. We're going to come over, we're going to inspect, and we can look to see if that line lines up with the line that we were lining up to originally. We can remove this tape, and you can trim this hinge fabric. Once you are trimmed, you can return this to the machine, and we're going to run the final color stop, which will stitch the rest of that satin stitch. When our design is finished, we can take the hoop off the machine. Can take off any tape. There's our door with our pocket. Okay. Now, I'm going to take this hoop, this design out of the hoop. We're going to set him to the side. We will trim him up when we trim the remaining blocks for the remaining houses once we get them all trimmed. Our next design is going to be the tan house. We're going to start with the roof, but we actually have a roof, we have a window file, and we have an base of the house file. So we actually have 3 hoopings to go to the tan house. We're going to start with the roof. We're going to be working in the large oval hoop, whether you are quilting or not. It still fits in the large oval or 5x7 field. We have our mesh cutaway inside of that hoop. We're going to add the quilt design to the embroidery design, but we need to make some movement. So let's take a look. We are using the 4x6 vertical tree file, and that we've added the roof design to. This roof is going to be sewn to the base of the house. So we need to move the embroidery design so that when we trim and sew it, it aligns where we want it to align to. So when you bring the design in, it centers it. We're fine with it being centered top to bottom. We're not going to move it top to bottom. We're only going to move it to the right. And so if I zoom in here, this bottom line of the roof design needs to line up with the far right design of the quilting design. So I'm going to move the design to the right by using my stitch width knob, turning it clockwise. I'm going to move just the roof over until the roof stitching line lines up with the stitching line of the quilt design. Now I can't get it exactly lined up on the simulator here, but on your machine you will be able to get it lined up right on top. Once all of that is done, we can stitch the design and you can work through your quilting just like we have been. And then we are going to start to applique the roof. Okay, there's nothing special with the roof construction. Everything is the standard procedure for appliquing this on. So we have our quilting is finished. I'm going to run a placement line to tell us where to put our roof fabric. Once our roof fabric is, placement line is there, we're going to lay our roof fabric right side up, covering all of that. We will tack it in place and then trim it down. Now, once your roof is satin stitched and the embellishment is on, the next step is to apply the glitter snow, just like we did in the blue house. So we're going to run the placement line. Make sure that you remove the protective plastic. We will place the glitter side up over all of those placement lines. We will tack it down, trim it, heat set it, and then run the cover stitch. Okay, when your roof is finished, we can go ahead and take him out of the hoop and set him to the side. We will trim him up in a moment. We are now going to make the windows. Before we can go and make the bottom half of the house, we need to make the window pockets. So the window pocket, I'm going to do just like I did the doors. We're actually going to do the window pocket of the tan house and the red house in one hooping. That way it's all done. And we are ready to go right into the red roof when we're all finished. The first design can be done, if you do a single window, you can do it in the small hoop. If you're doing both windows in one hooping, you'll need a medium hoop. The second part of this house will need the medium clamp or a maxi hoop. Both of the stabilizers for both parts, we are going to need the light mesh cutaway in the hoop. This is not like the door. We don't need it to be wash away. You're not going to see it. We're actually going to kind of create, it will be inside the fold of the window. And you are going to need a small piece of stitch 2-0 topping. We'll use it to place over top of the window when the machine is doing the outer satin stitch, just to keep the presser foot from stitching into the pocket. The embroidery design is centered right to left, and we're going to align it to the top of the quilting design. And I'll go over that once we get the windows created. So the first thing to notice is that the tan house window is larger than the red house window. So when you open up the design, you want to make sure that you have the correct one for the correct house that you're going to do. So I went ahead and I opened up the tan. I rotated it so that the flat edge, or the edge where you see the longer line, is towards the outside of the hoop. So my tan house, I actually rotated 90 degrees 3 times, and I moved it towards the bottom of the hoop. And my red house my red house window, I left him like he was and moved him to the top of the hoop. What's going to happen with this design is we are going to run a placement line. We're going to put our fabric down, and then we're going to stitch the window detail. What I want to show you is that when you do get your window pocket fabrics, okay, they are white. The tan window pocket is 2 by 4.5, okay, and you're going to fold it in half, wrong sides together, and on the inside I just put a little letter T. And the window pocket of the red house is 2 by 5, and so I put a little R on the wrong side, and you're also going to fold it in half, wrong sides together, and you're going to put a nice crease over at the iron into the fold. One thing that I forgot to mention is that because this window is going to have this satin stitching on it, she doesn't tell you to, but I did apply a piece of fusible woven just to half of this fabric. I didn't do it to the whole, just to the section that I know is going to stitch the satin stitch for the window pane. I just feel like it's going to give this thinner fabric a little bit more body and possibly a little less puckering. So completely optional, not required, but I did put a piece of fusible woven on the wrong side of half of that fold. It is a one color design, so I am going to, for the tan house, I am going to thread in the tan thread color, and then for the red house I will thread in the red thread color. First thing that we're going to do is we're going to stitch a placement line directly into the stabilizer. Now, in my stabilizer, I have a placement line. We have a nice long line across the top, and then we have a rectangle down below. You're going to unfold the fabric. If you've used fusible woven, that is the piece that's going to go down. The crease is going to go along that stitched line, okay? And we want to make sure that we've completely covered the rectangle with the lower fabric. We will then run a tack down to tack this in place. not do any trimming, leave it just like it is, and run the next color stop, which is going to stitch our window panes. Once window 1 is complete, we are going to repeat the same process with the red window, except I'm going to change my thread to red. Once our design is complete, we're going to take it out of the hoop. We're going to trim up the excess stabilizer, not cutting any of the fabric from around the edge. Now, once you've trimmed up the excess, we're going to refold along the line. That top bit of window pane from the front is meant to come to the back and fold over it, okay? So you didn't do anything wrong when that happens. That is the way that it's supposed to be. And that is our window pane that we're going to need to create the tan house. So let's look at the quilting design for the house. The tan house is using the 6x6 tree horizontal design that we are adding the house design to, which is the house that shows the number 6 on it. We're going to zoom in because just like we did with the roof, this top blue line that you see here needs to line up with the outside line of the quilt design. So I'm going to use my stitch length knob. I am going to move my design up until that blue line lines up with the outer line of my design. And that's pretty close. Okay. And then we're going to work through the process of quilting our background, just like we have. And then I will come back and we will talk about what's next. Now, before you start stitching, I would work through ironing a piece of fusible interfacing to the wrong side of all the house body pieces. She only tells you in the book to apply it to the windows, but we did it to all the pieces in the blue house, and I do feel like all of the stitching that's going to go into these items, that it's going to help give it a little bit more stability. So I would go ahead and iron fusible to the wrong side of those 3 pieces. We're then going to work through the first 7 color stops of the design, appliquing all of these pieces. I'm going to use this same cream color thread to do all of it. So we're going to be running the placement line, the tack down, and then we're going to trim the fabrics. Okay, all for the first 7 color stops onto your quilted backgrounds. Once your satin stitching and the other window pane is stitched, we're going to take our window pocket. Okay, we have our window pocket. With the fold at the top, align the horizontal window pane with the horizontal pane line on the left of the window. Okay. So I'm looking at this window pane here to line it up. So let me change cameras here. Let's change cameras. Okay. So I want to line up this way with this window. So if I line that up there, obviously I want to line up with this one here. Okay. Once we are lined up, we're going to tape across the fold. We're going to return this to the machine and we're going to stitch the tack down, and then we are going to cover this with, well, no, hold on. We're going to stitch the tack down and then we're going to trim the excess stabilizer away. Now, once that design is finished, I'm going to remove the wash away from around the outside. I'm not going to worry about the inside right now because I'll get that when I get it out of the hoop. I'm going to trim up the threads. Okay. Now we're just going to work through finishing up the stitching of this design. We have the door detail, the house number, inner outline, and all of that. So work through the final 3 color stops of the design, and then our tan house will be complete. Once your design is finished, you can go ahead and pop this out of the hoop, and then we are going to start working on our red house, okay, let's tackle our 3rd and final house. We are going to start with the red house roof. If you have already made the window and the door for the red house, you are ready to go right to part B of this project. Part B of this design will require the large oval hoop, and you're going to place a piece of light mesh cutaway inside of that hoop, and you're also going to need a small piece of wash away topping to put over top of this window. If you have not made the window for the red house, go ahead and make that just like we made the window for the tan house in the previous steps. With this design, just like with the roof on our previous design, we're going to open up our embroidery quilting file. We're going to add to it the roof. The red house roof is the one that comes to a point. We're going to zoom in, and we want this bottom green line here of the house to be aligned with the far right hand line of the quilt design. Okay, so we're going to use our stitch width knob turned clockwise to get those aligned, and once those are aligned, we are ready to embroider. Everything for this design with quilting is identical. Once we get to the actual roof portion, we're going to work through the first 3 color stops. That is going to be your roof placement line. You're going to tack your roof fabric down. You will trim it up to the stitching line, and then we will run the satin stitch. I am going to run all of these color stops in the coral color. Now, when our satin stitch of our roof is complete, we're going to change out to white thread. We're going to work through the steps of appliquing the glitter for the snow, just like we have in the previous blocks. We're going to run a placement line. Once we have the placement line, we're going to place our glitter right side up, tack it down, trim it, press it, and then we're going to run the color stop to cover the raw edge of the glitter. We're also going to continue with the white thread for 3 additional color stops. We're going to stitch the decorative outline, the roof detail, and the advent number before we change over to red thread to stitch the chimney top. Once your chimney is finished, we're going to work through appliquing the window base, okay? Not the window pocket, but the window base. I have applied a piece of fusible woven on the back side of this window to kind of help use it as a color blocker for the pink to show through. So we're going to run the placement line. We're going to put our fabric right side up. We're going to tack it down, and then we're going to trim the excess fabric from around the edge. Now once your fabric is trimmed, you can put it back on the machine and you're going to run the one little window pane piece. We're going to take our pocket. We're going to line up the fold of the pocket with those little tiny tick marks and the center pane lined up with the center marking pane here. I'm going to tape that in place, covering that fold. That way when it tacks this down, the foot doesn't get caught in my pocket fold. We'll return this to the machine, and we're going to run the color stop to tack this down. The window is bigger than the tack down, so don't panic. Once your pocket fabric is trimmed, we're going to take that piece of stitch 2-0 or wash away topping. We're going to tape it in place, and then we're going to return the hoop to the machine to run the satin stitch around the window. You can go ahead and take your roof out of the hoop, remove all the excess wash away topping stabilizer, and set this to the side. We're ready to move on to the body of our house. So if you've already made your door, you can move on to part B. If you need to make the door, you will do so in a medium hoop, following the same instructions we did at the beginning when we made the doors here. Part B is going to require that medium clamp hoop or maxi hoop. You're going to place the poly mesh or light mesh cutaway into the hoop. We're going to open up the quilting design, and we need to move this just like we moved the previous house. So we're going to use the 6x6 plant design. Let's put the right hoop on there. We're going to add the red house, which is the one with the 3 windows. And we're going to move the line. This top line of the house needs to line up with the top line of the quilt design, which we have now moved up and matched. Okay, so once you have all that in alignment, we are going to work through all of the quilting of our background, and then we will start appliquing the house. I would iron fusible backing to the wrong side of all of the fabrics. Okay, so all of the house pieces, with the exception of the tan pieces, leave those alone. I would iron fusible. Look, just piece it together. Just overlap them. You know that you're going to be trimming around the edge. There's nothing wrong. Doesn't have to be a solid piece. And we're going to iron to the wrong side there. Leave your door and the pieces that go with the door just like they are. And then we will move on over to the machine. One mental note about when you're placing the background fabric. This is a directional background fabric. We need to make sure that this stripe is going to go in the same direction as the roof fabric did. Now, the roof stripe should go top to bottom, and when we put it in the hoop, it was done, the roof is done sideways, so it ran right to left. With the house is stitched upright. So when you put your fabric in the hoop, make sure that your stripe is running top to bottom so that when you attach this roof, your background fabrics will run the same direction. All right, let's work through appliquing our house. Now that our quilting is finished, we are going to run the first 8 color stops of this design. We are going to be running the placement line and the tack down for the house. We're going to be running the placement line and the tack down for the eaves, which is the little scallop. And then we're going to be running the placement and tack down for the window. And then the placement and tack down for the porch. We're going to get all of this appliqued to our background fabric, and then we will work through doing all the cover stitching for this project. I am going to do all of this applique in white thread. Once all of our appliques are stitched and placed and trimmed, we're going to run the first color stop, which is going to satin stitch around the house and the windows. Once your porch is satin stitched, we're going to switch over to white thread for the next 4 color stops. We're going to be stitching the cover stitch of the scallop, the roof, the detail on the house, and then the advent number. After your advent number has stitched, it's time to work through the steps of attaching the door pocket, and the actual dimensional door. So the first thing that we need to do is applique the door back. So that's the remaining single piece of door fabric. We're going to thread the machine with the thread color that coordinates with it. I would use the same color that you satin stitched for your door. We're going to run a placement line, and then we're going to place this fabric covering all of that placement line and tack it in place. Do not trim. You're going to take your pocket piece. The fold of the pocket is going to line up with the little tick marks that were just stitched. We're going to line up the fold there. We're going to tape across that fold, and then we're going to tack this in place. And we're going to trim the excess fabric from all the way around. Once you are trimmed all the way around, you're going to turn the hoop to the machine. We're going to run the next color stop, which is going to run the decorative stitch around the raw edge of this piece. We're going to remove the hoop from the machine, and we're going to come over to the ironing board or to your felt mat, just like we did before in attaching the door. I've taken my 2 straight pins. I've gone down through this straight line here, this straight stitching right at the end of my satin stitch. I'm now going to take that directly down here, right into that same line of stitching right where the decorative stitch ended. Okay, I want to get my door lined up top to bottom, left to right, so that everything looks like it should match. I'll move that over for you here in just one second. Okay, so you can see my pins are down through that line right there. I'm going to flip it over. I'm going to verify that my pins are coming out through the straight stitching in my bobbin area. Okay. I'm going to tape over my door. I'm going to carefully just kind of lift up and make sure that everything is still aligned here. Just peeking underneath. Okay. Before I take those pins out, I'm going to put a piece of tape right there. I'm going to carefully hold my door, take out my pins. We're going to come over to the machine here, and we're going to double check that we are aligned correctly. You can unthread your needle if you like. I'm going to leave my needle threaded. I am going to fast forward, so I'm going to advance my machine 7 stitches, so just like we did a minute ago. And then I'm going to lower my needle. And I can see that my needle is not stitching into that straight line. Okay? So I want that needle to stitch into the straight line of this stitching. So maybe you can see a little better. So if I left my door where it's at, that needle is nowhere near that line. I want that line, that needle, to drop into that line. Okay? So I'm going to put my needle down here for a second. I'm going to peel this up. Flatten everything out. I'm going to raise my needle. I'm going to advance a few more stitches. Lower my needle, make sure it touches that line. advance a few more stitches, okay, until I'm all the way down and I'm good with that stitching. At that point, I'm going to go back to the first stitch of the design, but before I can do that, we have to move this out of the way. Okay, and we're going to stitch this. Now I'm going to do this slowly so that I can make sure that everything's still in line. And I can move my door if necessary. Once that's stitched on, we're going to take the hoop off the machine. We're going to trim this excess. We're going to return it back to the machine, and we're going to stitch the satin stitch. Design is finished. We can go ahead and remove this from the machine and from the hoop, and then we need to convert our machine over to sewing or go to your sewing machine. We need to do some trimming and some sewing on our tan and red houses. Now we need to do trimming on our blocks before we can do some sewing. So the tan and red house are going to require some trimming and then sewing, and then our blue house just needs to be trimmed. So let's start with the tan roof. Okay. So in the book, she tells you to align a ruler to the bottom of the roof and trim the bottom of the block only. So I'm going to align my ruler up right at the bottom of that roof fabric, right along the line of the quilting design, and we're going to cut. I'm only cutting the bottom. Okay. I'm going to take the tan house, and the instructions for the tan house tell you to align a ruler to the top of the house and trim the top of the block only. So again, I'm going to line my ruler up right at the top of my house and trim across. Okay. There he is. We are going to take and place these right sides together. Okay. Kind of centering the roof. You have your placement lines or your tack downs of your background fabric. I'm just going to kind of match those to make sure that we are somewhat lined up. And we're going to sew 1/4 inch across that top. Now before I go and sew that, I'm going to get the other house trimmed as well, so that when we come over there to trim, we can. Okay. Now for our red house, we're basically going to repeat the same steps. We're going to take our roof. We are going to trim only at the bottom of this roof. Okay. And we're going to take our house. We're going to align at the top of the house and trim him there. Okay, so trimmed here and here. Again, right sides together. Kind of center. I'm using my placement lines to kind of align everything. We're going to take these 2 blocks over to the sewing machine, and we're going to sew 1/4 inch all the way across. Your 1/4 of an inch is already pretty much marked for you. It's going to be this first line of stitching from the edge that we trimmed. That's exactly a 1/4 of an inch. So if we just sew right on top of those 2 lines, that'll be exactly what we need. Once we have sewn the 1/4 of an inch on both of those lines, we are going to go over to the iron. We're going to press this seam open, and then we will go about centering and trimming the rest of the block. Looks like. You could always baste this together first. Pull this over. You could always baste this seam and check if you're not 100% sure if your alignment is where you want it to be. We are going to press this seam open. It is going to take a little bit because there is satin stitching that we are folding back along this line. If you have a clapper will be very helpful. My clapper is not in the studio at the moment, so I'm just going to use my Kimberbell tape dispenser. I'm going to set that on top of my seam while it cools. I'm going to move him over to the side. We're going to check this one. It looks good. We're going to get this seam open just by setting something heavy on this while it cools. It will help keep that from wanting to fold back up, kind of forces it to stay down. Back over at the cutting table, we now need to do some trimming. Not only are we trimming top to bottom, but we're also going to be trimming left to right. And these blocks are going to be larger than what we have a orange pop ruler for, okay? So we're going to set the tan and the red house to the side. We're going to come and do this on the blue house first, okay? So that it's kind of a test without that seam there. I'm going to take my book here. We're going to go back to page 50. She tells you to visually center the 4.5 by 6.5 and the 6.5 by 8.5 ruler nested together. Okay, so I'm going to get these nested together. I'm not going to be cutting top and bottom. I'm only using this ruler right this second to trim to 4.5 inches wide. This block is going to be 4.5 by 8.5, okay? And so I just want to make sure that visually I'm centered, which pretty much should be your stitching lines. So I'm going to trim just the sides of my block. Okay. Once my sides are cut, I'm going to take out this, and now we're going to be using this to trim, okay, this direction. Okay, so this is so we're going to now figure out where we want this to be, which should be, for the most part, at 8.5, should be right at the top of those stitching lines that are there. Oops. One day my rotating mat will make it back down here into the studio. Now, you're going to have some pieces that are still kind of stuck. You can take your ruler and your rotary cutter. and extend that line that you trimmed. You should now be 4.5 by 8.5. And that is what he is. Okay, so there is the blue house. I'm going to take my blue house and put him away. He's all done. Now, our tan house is going to be trimmed to 8.5 by 10.5. Okay. So 8.5. Okay. We're going to take the 6.5 by 8.5 orange pop and the 8.5 by 10.5 orange pop. We're going to be doing the same things. We're going to kind of visually center him left to right. We're only going to cut the left and right here. So I'm actually going to turn myself a little sideways. So I'm going to be cutting these two edges since I don't have my rotating mat. I'm just kind of visually centering, seeing if I have the same amount of space left and right. And I'm only going to cut, for me, on the sides of the house. Okay. Take that inner ruler out. And now we're going to be looking at the top and bottom of the house. And that's the 10.5. And then you're going to just carefully extend those lines that you just cut. You're going to verify 6.5. Yep, by 10.5. And there is our tan house, which isn't going to fit back in that baggie. So we're just going to set him over here. And then we're going to repeat the same steps doing the red house. Okay. And the reason that we're just not going right to a ruler is because we can't guarantee that our placement lines 100% or our tack downs for our background 100% line up with each other based upon where we sewed at. So that's why we're not just trimming. Now you can very much so, if you wanted, and just take a ruler and go around it, but this is going to help you be centered. And there we have our 3 houses from this week. We have our blue house, our tan house, and our red house. We have pockets behind doors and pockets in windows. Okay, so a lot of stitching, but adorable houses have been created or constructed this week. So just as a reminder, when you are doing your assembly, we are using 1/4 inch seam allowance, which is pretty much marked with the tack downs from the batting, and we are going to be pressing those seams open. And that's what I have for you this week. I look forward to seeing you next Wednesday, November 1st at 10 a.m. We're going to be constructing the tree and the lace ornaments and finishing up the last of our filler quilting. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day. happy stitching, and I look forward to seeing you next week.